The boss froze when he saw his missing daughter's childhood photo with the flight attendant on a flight. The Boeing 737 sliced through cloudless skies somewhere over Pennsylvania, carrying its usual cargo of business travelers, vacationers, and people running toward or away from something. Charles Miller belonged to none of these categories, though from the outside, he looked every bit the successful businessman. Tailored charcoal suit, Italian leather shoes, laptop open on the tray table displaying quarterly projections he'd stopped reading 20 minutes ago. He was 53, though people often guessed younger. Good genes, his assistant always said. Charles knew better. It was emptiness that kept you preserved, like those insects trapped in amber, perfectly intact, completely lifeless. His gray eyes, the color of winter storms, drifted from the spreadsheet to the window. 30,000 feet below, America sprawled in neat geometric patches. From up here, everything looked orderly, manageable, nothing like the chaos that had defined his life for the past 23 years. "Coffee, sir." The voice pulled him back. Charles turned to find a flight attendant standing in the aisle, her smile professional but warm. She was young, late 20s maybe, with chestnut hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Something about her struck him as familiar, though he couldn't place why. Pretty girl? No, not pretty. There was something deeper there. Serene, almost. "Please," Charles said, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She reached for the carafe, and that's when it happened. A small object tumbled from the pocket of her Navy uniform, bouncing once on his armrest before landing face up on his laptop keyboard. A photograph. Old, judging by the yellowed edges and the way the colors had faded to that distinctive 70s warmth. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." The flight attendant, her name tag read Emily, reached for it. But Charles had already picked it up. The world stopped, not metaphorically, not in that casual way people describe moments of surprise. Charles Miller's entire universe ground to a halt, as if someone had hit pause on reality itself. The photograph showed a little girl, maybe 4 years old, wearing a white dress embroidered with tiny flowers. She clutched a pink stuffed rabbit. Its ear flopped over in that way beloved toys have. But it wasn't the girl that stole Charles's breath. It was the background. A garden. His garden, the one from the house in Brooklyn Heights. The brownstone he'd sold 18 years ago because he couldn't stand to look at it anymore. There was the stone fountain, the one Susan had insisted they install because she loved the sound of running water. There was the flowering tree, a cherry blossom they'd planted together the spring after they got married. And the girl, those light brown eyes, that tiny beauty mark just beside her left eyebrow. Jesus Christ. "Sir, are you all right?" Emily's voice came from somewhere far away. "Can I have my photo back?" Charles's hands were shaking, actually trembling like he was 90 years old. He looked up at her, really looked, and felt something crack open in his chest. The shape of her face, the way her hair caught the cabin light, the gentle slope of her nose. Susan. She looked like Susan. "Where did you get this?" His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. Emily's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "I'm sorry. This photograph. Where did it come from?" She bit her lower lip. That universal gesture of discomfort. Other passengers were starting to notice the holdup. An older woman in 11B craned her neck to see what was going on. "It's mine," Emily said carefully. "Well, it was my mother's. She passed away 2 years ago and left me a box of old things." "That was in it, sir. I really need to." "You said was your mother's." Charles gripped the photo tighter. "What does that mean?" "Sir, I need to continue service. Please." The word came out like a prayer. "Please just answer me." Something in his face must have gotten through because Emily's professional mask slipped. She glanced down the aisle, then back at him, and Charles saw it. The same emptiness he carried, the same hole where something vital should be. "I was adopted," she said quietly. "The woman who raised me. My mom. She found me at an orphanage in Pennsylvania when I was a baby. She kept a few things from before. This photo was one of them. The cabin pressure felt wrong. Too thin. Charles couldn't get enough air. How old were you when you were adopted?" 6 months, according to my records. Why are you... Do you have anything else?" "From before." Emily's hand went to her collar, and Charles watched as she pulled out a delicate gold chain. On it hung a small pendant. Just a single letter, S. The oxygen masks should be dropping. That's what should happen when you can't breathe. Right? Charles stared at that pendant, at that single golden letter, and felt 23 years of carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. Susan's necklace, the one he'd given her on their wedding day, the one she'd been wearing the night she disappeared with their baby daughter who'd been 6 months old. Sir, you're scaring me. Emily took a small step back. I need my photo back, please. Charles looked at the image again. The garden, the fountain, the flowering tree. All of it had been there 27 years ago. All of it had been part of the life he'd lost on a cold October night when he'd woken to an empty bed and a note that said, I don't want this life anymore. Don't look for me. The search had lasted 2 years. Private investigators, police reports, leads that went nowhere. He'd found nothing. No Susan, no baby Emily, just silence and that goddamn note in handwriting that looked like hers but felt all wrong. Eventually, he'd stopped looking, built a textile empire instead, filled his days with mergers and acquisitions and bottom lines, became the kind of man who flew business class and wore $1,000 suits and had nothing, absolutely nothing that mattered. And now here she was, 27 years later, serving him coffee at 30,000 feet. What's your name? He asked. Though he already knew. Emily Harding. Harding. My adoptive mother's name. I never knew my birth name. The records were incomplete. Of course they were. Charles's mind was racing, stumbling over itself. Could this be real? Could fate be this cruel and this kind at the same time? I need to talk to you, he said. After the flight, please. It's important. Emily shook her head. Sir, I don't think... I knew that garden. The words tumbled out. The one in your photo. I lived there, 27 years ago, with my wife, Susan. He watched the color drain from her face. And we had a daughter, Charles continued, his voice breaking. She'd be about your age now. She disappeared when she was 6 months old. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The plane hummed around them. Someone called for a flight attendant from coach. The captain announced their descent into New York would begin in 20 minutes. Emily's hand was still on that pendant. That's I can't do this right now, she whispered. I have to work, I have to. She looked around desperately, as if the cabin might offer an escape. I need my photo. Charles handed it back, his fingers brushing hers. The contact lasted less than a second, but he felt it like an electric current. I'm staying at the plaza, he said. Room 1512 if you want to talk. If you want to know more, I'll be there. I'll wait. Emily took the photograph with trembling hands and tucked it back into her pocket. The pendant disappeared beneath her collar. When she looked at him again, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't even know if I believe you, she said. This could be some kind of trick. You could be crazy. I could be, Charles agreed. But I'm not. She studied his face for what felt like an eternity. Then, without another word, she turned and continued down the aisle with her coffee carafe, leaving Charles alone with his laptop and his spreadsheets and the weight of 23 years of questions that might finally have answers. He watched her move through the cabin, graceful and kind, offering drinks and smiles to passengers who had no idea they were sitting near a miracle. His daughter, his Emily, still alive, still in this world. The plane began its descent into New York, and Charles Miller closed his laptop without saving his work. The projections didn't matter. The quarterly reports didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the young woman making her way back to the galley. Carrying his entire broken heart in her pocket without even knowing it, Charles didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that photograph. The garden, the fountain, the little girl with Susan's eyes. He sat in his hotel room at the plaza, still wearing his dress shirt and slacks, staring at the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more per night than most people made in a week. The irony wasn't lost on him. All this luxury, all this success, and he'd trade every penny to go back 27 years and do things differently. Susan, her name still hurt to think, even after all this time, especially now, when the wound he thought had scarred over felt fresh and bleeding again. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a folder he rarely opened. The photos there were scanned from old prints. This was before everyone carried cameras in their pockets. Before life was documented in real time and posted for the world to see. There she was, Susan Miller, née Patterson, age 24, standing in front of that same fountain from Emily's photograph. Her dark hair fell past her shoulders, and she wore a sundress the color of cream. She was laughing at something off camera, probably him. He'd always been able to make her laugh. They'd met at a charity gala, some stuffy Upper East Side thing his father had dragged him to. Charles had been 28, already working his way up in the textile business, already learning that success came with a price tag attached. Susan had been there with friends, completely out of place in her simple black dress among the designer gowns. He'd spilled champagne on her shoes. She'd laughed instead of getting angry. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony in Brooklyn Heights, in the garden of the brownstone they'd just bought together. Her parents had flown in from Ohio. His father had given them a generous check and a lecture about responsibility. Susan had worn flowers in her hair and cried during her vows. Charles remembered thinking he was the luckiest man alive. God, we were happy. The pregnancy had been a surprise. A good one, Susan had told him over breakfast on a Tuesday morning, tears streaming down her face as she held up the positive test. Charles had picked her up and spun her around the kitchen until she'd laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. They'd painted the nursery yellow, neutral, because they wanted to be surprised. Bought a crib that Susan had spent hours assembling because she insisted on doing it herself. Argued good-naturedly about names. Susan wanted something classic. Charles preferred something unique. They'd compromised on Emily Rose Miller, born on March 15th at 3:47 a.m., after 14 hours of labor that had aged Charles a decade. He'd held his daughter for the first time and understood. Finally, what people meant when they said your life changes in an instant. She'd been perfect. Tiny fingers that wrapped around his thumb. Dark eyes that seemed to look right through him. A cry that could wake the dead, but a smile that made everything okay. For 6 months, Charles had lived in a kind of bliss he didn't know existed. Coming home from work to find Susan singing to Emily in the rocking chair. Middle of the night feedings where they'd take turns. Both of them exhausted but somehow still happy. First laughs. First solid foods. The million tiny milestones that make up a life. And then, October 23rd happened. Charles had worked late that night. Some deal that couldn't wait, though he couldn't remember now what it had been. Probably something to do with his father's company. Margaret had called him 3 times, insisting he stay to review contracts. He'd gotten home around midnight. The house had been dark, quiet. He'd assumed Susan was asleep, had climbed the stairs quietly, not wanting to wake her or the baby, peeked into the nursery first, just to see Emily sleeping. The crib was empty. He'd checked their bedroom next, also empty. Bed made. No sign of Susan. The panic had started then. He'd searched every room, called her phone, checked with neighbors. Nothing. By 3 a.m., he'd called the police. By dawn, he'd found the note. It had been on the kitchen counter, weighed down by Susan's wedding ring. The handwriting looked like hers. Mostly. The message was short, brutal. Charles, I can't do this anymore. I don't want this life. I'm taking Emily somewhere you'll never find us. Don't look for me. Don't try to bring us back. This is my choice. Susan, no. I'm sorry. No. I love you. Just cold, final words that had shattered everything he thought he knew about his life. The police had treated it as a voluntary disappearance. Woman leaves husband, takes kid, starts over. Happened all the time. There was no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, just a note and 2 missing people. Charles had hired private investigators anyway, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars chasing leads that went nowhere. His father had told him to let it go, move on, focus on the business. Margaret had been more sympathetic, but she'd eventually said the same thing. After 2 years of searching, Charles had stopped, not because he'd wanted to, but because there was nothing left to find. Susan and Emily had vanished like smoke, so he'd done what his father suggested, thrown himself into work, built his textile empire into something that would have made the old man proud if he'd lived to see it, made his first million by 35, his first 10 million by 40, and none of it mattered. Not one goddamn bit. Because he'd wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, convinced he could hear a baby crying, would see a woman with dark hair on the street, and his heart would stop until she turned around and wasn't Susan, would watch fathers with their daughters in the park and feel something twist in his chest. The emptiness had become part of him, as natural as breathing. He dated occasionally over the years. His assistant insisted it wasn't healthy to be alone, but nothing stuck. How could it? He was still married to a ghost. Charles looked at his phone again. Susan smiled at him from across 27 years. Young, beautiful, alive. What happened to you? Emily had said her adoptive mother died 2 years ago. But what about Susan? When had she died? How? And why? Why, in God's name? Had she left that note if she'd planned to put their daughter up for adoption anyway? None of it made sense. It never had. His phone buzzed, a text from his assistant. Flight back to LA confirmed for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Meeting with the Hong Kong distributors on Thursday. Charles stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Cancel everything. I'm staying in New York indefinitely." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Is everything okay?" "No," he typed, "but it might be." He set the phone down and walked to the window. Manhattan glittered below him, a million lives playing out in a million lit windows. Somewhere out there was Emily Harding, probably unable to sleep, probably thinking he was crazy. Maybe he was crazy. Maybe this was all some cosmic coincidence. Maybe that photo meant nothing. But Charles didn't believe in coincidences, not anymore. Tomorrow, he'd start looking for answers. Real answers this time. He'd hire the best investigator money could buy. He'd dig into Emily's adoption records. He'd find out what had really happened that October night 27 years ago. And if Emily was his daughter, when Emily was his daughter, he'd never let her go again. Outside, the first hints of dawn touched the sky. Charles watched the city wake up, feeling something he hadn't felt in 23 years. Hope. James Collins didn't look like a private investigator. He looked like someone's favorite uncle. Soft around the middle, wire-rimmed glasses, a cardigan that had seen better days. But Charles had done his homework. Collins specialized in cold cases, the kind that had gone silent years ago. Missing persons, unexplained disappearances, the ghosts that kept people up at night. His office was in a walk-up in Midtown, sandwiched between a Chinese restaurant and a dry cleaner. The waiting room smelled like someone's grandmother's house. Old paper and coffee that had been sitting too long. "Mr. Miller." Collins extended a hand, his grip firm despite his grandfatherly appearance. "Come on back." The office was exactly what Charles expected. Files stacked on every surface. A desk buried under paperwork. Walls covered with corkboards and photos connected by red string like something out of a detective show. But there was order to the chaos. Collins knew where everything was. So, Collins settled into his chair, which creaked under his weight. "You said on the phone this was about your wife and daughter. Disappeared 27 years ago. 23 since I stopped looking." Charles pulled out his phone, showed him the scanned photo of Susan. "This is my wife. Susan Miller. She left in October 1998 with our 6-month-old daughter, Emily." Collins studied the image. "Police treat it as voluntary. Yes, there was a note. No signs of forced entry or struggle. They closed it after a few weeks. But you didn't believe the note." "I didn't want to believe it." Charles put the phone away. "I hired investigators back then. Good ones. They found nothing. After 2 years, I gave up." "What changed?" Charles told him about the flight, the photograph. Emily Harding with her chestnut hair and Susan's eyes, carrying a picture taken in his garden 27 years ago. The pendant with the letter S. Collins listened without interrupting, his expression neutral. When Charles finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Could be a coincidence," he said carefully. "I don't believe in coincidences." "Most people don't when they're desperate." Collins pulled a notepad closer. "But sometimes a garden is just a garden, Mr. Miller. Sometimes people look like other people. I need you to understand that before we start." "I understand, but I need to know for sure." Collins nodded slowly. "All right. I'll need everything you have. Adoption records for Emily Harding. The original police reports from your wife's disappearance. Hospital records from your daughter's birth. Names of the investigators you hired before. And I'll need access to that photograph. The original, if possible. Whatever you need." This won't be cheap. Cold cases never are. Charles pulled out his checkbook. How much do you need up front? Let's start with $20,000 if I find something. We'll talk about next steps. Charles wrote the check without hesitation, slid it across the desk. Collins picked it up, examined it, then filed it away in a drawer. One more thing, the investigator said. This girl, Emily, have you contacted her since the flight? No, I gave her my hotel information, but she hasn't called. Good. Don't push. If this goes where I think it might go, we need to be careful. Adoption records from that era can be complicated. Charles knew what he meant. Sealed files, privacy laws, documents that had conveniently disappeared. The late 90s were before everything went digital, before paper trails became electronic and harder to erase. How long will this take? Collins shrugged. Depends what I find. Give me 2 weeks to start. I'll call if I hit something significant. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Charles stayed in New York, working remotely from his hotel room, fielding increasingly concerned calls from his assistant, and increasingly annoyed ones from Margaret. What's going on with you? His sister demanded during their third call that week. You've missed 2 board meetings. The Hong Kong deal is hanging by a thread. Handle it, Charles said, staring out at the city. That's what we pay you for. Charles, this isn't like you. Are you sick? Should I be worried? I'm fine. Just dealing with some personal matters. What personal matters? You don't have personal matters. You have quarterly reports and expansion plans. He'd hung up before she could dig deeper. Margaret had always been good at extracting information, at finding weaknesses and exploiting them. It was what made her an excellent businesswoman and a terrible person to confide in. Meanwhile, Emily remained silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. Charles told himself that was fine. Expected even. He'd basically ambushed her at 30,000 feet with an insane story about lost daughters and mysterious photographs. Of course she wouldn't call. She probably thought he was delusional, but he took the same flight every Tuesday and Thursday. The routes Emily regularly worked according to his discreet inquiries with the airline. He'd book seat 12A, order coffee, and watch her move through the cabin with that serene confidence that reminded him so much of Susan. She never acknowledged him directly, but he caught her looking sometimes, quick glances when she thought he wasn't paying attention. She was curious, scared, maybe, but curious. On day 13, Collins called. I need you to come to the office. Now. Charles was there in 20 minutes, probably breaking half the traffic laws in Manhattan. He found Collins at his desk, surrounded by even more papers than usual, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Tell me you found something, Charles said. Collins pulled out a faded manila folder, set it on the desk between them. Emily Rose Harding, adopted December 1998, through St. Catherine's Home for Children in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. She was brought there in October, roughly 6 months old. Charles's heart hammered. October, the same month Susan disappeared. Gets better. Collins opened the folder. The intake form says the mother voluntarily surrendered the child, but there's no signature, no identification provided. The caseworker noted circumstances unclear and documentation incomplete. That's not standard procedure, not even close. Especially in '98, there should be birth certificates, medical records, legal waivers, but Emily's file has almost nothing, just an intake form and an adoption certificate issued 3 months later. Someone buried the trail on purpose. That's what it looks like. Collins pulled out another document. This is where it gets interesting. I found the hospital where your daughter was born. Mount Sinai, right? Charles nodded. I tracked down some of the staff from that time. Most are retired now. One nurse, Patricia Henley, died last year, but before she died, she gave a statement to her priest. Collins slid a photocopy across the desk. It was a handwritten letter, the script shaky but legible. Father Marcus, I need to confess something that's haunted me for 23 years. In October 1998, I was working at Mount Sinai when a woman came to me with money and a request. She wanted me to falsify adoption documents for a newborn, the Miller baby. She said it was a family matter, that the mother was unfit. I was young, stupid, and broke. I took the money. I helped make that baby disappear from official records. I've tried to forget, but I can't. That child had a father who was looking for her. I helped steal her from him. I'm dying now, and I can't take this sin to my grave without confession. The woman who paid me was Margaret Miller, the baby's aunt. The room tilted. Charles gripped the edge of the desk. Margaret, he whispered. My sister Margaret. Collins nodded grimly. The nurse kept records. Bank transfers from an account in Margaret's name. Dates that line up with your daughter's birth. It's all here. Charles couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Margaret, his own sister. The woman he'd worked beside for 3 decades. The woman he'd trusted with his business. His livelihood. She'd stolen his daughter. There's more, Collins said quietly. I started digging into Susan's disappearance. Found something the police missed? He pulled out a police report. Highlighted a section near the bottom, witness statement from a neighbor. Mrs. Chen, 3 doors down from the Brooklyn Heights house. I saw a woman arguing with Mrs. Miller the day before she disappeared. Dark hair, expensive coat. They were in the driveway. Mrs. Miller was crying, holding the baby. The other woman was pointing at her. Looked angry. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Dark hair, Charles said. Expensive coat. That's Margaret. Your wife didn't leave voluntarily, Mr. Miller. She was forced out. And I think I know why. Collins pulled out corporate documents. Articles of incorporation for Miller Textiles, dated 1995. You were building your company when Emily was born. But if you'd stayed focused on your family, you'd never have given Margaret the control she needed. She wanted power. You were in the way. A wife and baby made you vulnerable, distracted. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Margaret had always been ambitious, always pushed him to work longer hours, close bigger deals, and after Susan disappeared, Charles had thrown himself into the business completely, given Margaret more and more authority. She'd won. Where is Susan now? Charles asked, his voice hollow. Collins hesitated. I'm still working on that. But Mr. Miller, you need to prepare yourself. Emily said her adoptive mother died 2 years ago. I think that might have been Susan. The world went silent. Charles sat in his hotel room that night with a bottle of scotch he didn't remember opening, and documents spread across the coffee table like accusations. Bank statements, the nurse's confession, police reports with Margaret's name highlighted in yellow. Each piece of paper, another nail in the coffin of everything he'd believed about his life. His sister had destroyed him. Not quickly, not mercifully. She'd done it slowly, methodically, over 27 years. Let him suffer. Let him think Susan had abandoned him, that his wife had looked at their life together and decided it wasn't enough. Let him build an empire on the ashes of his broken heart, while she sat across from him in board meetings. Smiling, the scotch burned going down. Charles poured another. His phone rang. Margaret, for the 4th time that evening. This time he answered. Finally, she said. Charles, what the hell is going on? You've been in New York for 2 weeks. You're not returning emails. The board is asking questions. Let them ask. That's not an answer. I need you back in LA. We have the Textile Expo next month and I know what you did. Silence, long enough that Charles checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. What are you talking about? Margaret's voice was careful now. Controlled. Susan, Emily. October 1998. Charles kept his voice level despite the rage building in his chest. I know everything. Another pause. When Margaret spoke again, the warmth was gone. You don't know anything. Patricia Henley, the nurse at Mount Sinai. She kept records. Margaret, bank transfers, dates, your name on everything. That woman was senile, dying. People say all kinds of things when they're... She had proof. Charles stood, walked to the window. Manhattan glittered below, indifferent to his pain. You paid her to falsify adoption documents. You threatened Susan. You made my wife believe I'd signed our daughter away. Charles, you stole my family. The words hung between them. Charles could hear Margaret breathing on the other end, calculating. She'd always been good at math, at weighing odds and outcomes. Where did you hear this? She asked finally. Does it matter? It matters because whoever's feeding you this information is lying. I don't know what game you think you're playing. But it's not a game. Charles's control snapped. You took my daughter. You drove my wife away. You let me think for 27 years that they'd abandoned me. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. Explain how you could do this. Margaret was quiet for so long Charles thought she'd hung up. Then, you were weak. The word hit like a physical blow. After Emily was born, Margaret continued, her voice cold and precise. You changed. Suddenly it was all about family time and work-life balance. You wanted to leave the office at 5, take weekends off. You were building a company, Charles. You didn't have time for that domestic bullshit. She was my daughter. She was a distraction. And Susan, God, Susan was worse. Always calling, always needing you for something. The business was suffering. I couldn't let you throw away everything we'd built because you wanted to play house. Charles felt something crack inside him. So you destroyed my family. I saved the company. Look at what we have now. Miller Textiles is worth $500 million. We have manufacturing in 12 countries. That wouldn't exist if you'd stayed home changing diapers. I didn't want the company. I wanted my family. You say that now, but back then, you were ambitious, Charles. You wanted success just as much as I did. I just helped you stay focused. By stealing my child. By removing an obstacle. Margaret's voice turned defensive. And it's not like Emily suffered. She was adopted by a good woman, raised properly. She turned out fine. Susan's dead. That stopped her. What? Susan died 2 years ago. Emily's adoptive mother. Except she wasn't just the adoptive mother, was she? Susan took Emily and raised her under a different name because you threatened them both. That's not... I never threatened anyone. Mrs. Chen saw you, the neighbor. She saw you arguing with Susan the day before she disappeared. Saw Susan crying, holding Emily. Saw you pointing your finger in her face. Margaret's breathing quickened. That nosy old bitch. What did you say to her? What did you threaten Susan with? Nothing, I explained the situation. Told her you'd signed the adoption papers. That it was already done. That fighting it would only make things worse. You lied to her. I protected the family business. There is no family anymore, Charles shouted. Don't you get that? You destroyed it. For what, money, power? Was it worth it? Margaret, you got the money too. Don't act like you didn't benefit. Charles laughed, a bitter sound. Benefit, right? I got rich and empty. I got 27 years of wondering what I did wrong. I got to watch other fathers with their daughters and feel something die inside me every single time. You're being dramatic, and you're a monster. The line crackled with tension. Be careful, Charles. Margaret's voice dropped low. You start making accusations like this public. You'll destroy more than just me. Miller Textiles will tank. Our investors will run. Everything we've built will collapse. I don't care. Yes, you do. That company is your legacy. Emily is my legacy. My daughter. The one you stole from me. You can't prove any of this. The nurse is dead. The records are sealed. Even if you go to the police, the statute of limitations ran out years ago. You have nothing. She was right. Charles knew she was right. Patricia Henley's deathbed confession wouldn't hold up in court. The bank transfers could be explained away. Mrs. Chen's witness statement was decades old and didn't prove anything criminal. Legally, Margaret was untouchable. Maybe I can't put you in prison, Charles said quietly, but I can make sure everyone knows what you are. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Charles, think about what you're doing. Think about the shareholders, the employees. Think about Dad's legacy. Dad's been dead for 15 years. He doesn't care anymore. I'm your sister. You stopped being my sister the day you took my daughter. Charles hung up. His hands were shaking. The Scotch glass was empty again. His phone immediately started ringing. Margaret calling back. He declined it. She called again. Declined. Again. On the 4th attempt. He blocked her number. Then he sat down and did something he hadn't done in 27 years. He cried. Not the silent tears he'd shed in the hospital when Colin showed him the nurse's confession. Real crying. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and primal, that shakes your whole body and leaves you gasping for air. He cried for Susan, who'd spent 27 years protecting their daughter from a monster she thought he'd become, who'd died believing he'd signed away their child. He cried for Emily, who'd grown up without a father because her aunt had decided a balance sheet was more important than a family. He cried for himself, for the years lost, for the man he'd become in the absence of love, and when he was done, when there was nothing left inside him but a hollow ache and grim determination. He picked up his phone and called Collins. "I need everything you have," he said. "Every document, every statement, every piece of evidence. I don't care if it'll hold up in court. I'm going public with this." "Mr. Miller, that might not be wise. I'm not looking for wisdom. I'm looking for justice. Can you help me or not?" Collins was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yeah, I can help you." "Good, because I'm done protecting Margaret. I'm done protecting the company. The only person I should have been protecting all along was Emily. Have you told her yet?" "About what we found?" Charles looked at the documents spread across his table. "The evidence of Margaret's betrayal." "Not yet, but I will. She deserves to know the truth. She deserves to hear it from you first, before it becomes public." "I know." Charles rubbed his eyes. "I'll tell her soon. I just need to figure out how to explain that her entire life was built on a lie. There's no easy way to say something like that." "No," Charles agreed. "There isn't." He ended the call and stood at the window again, looking out at the city where his daughter lived and worked, completely unaware that her world was about to change forever. Tomorrow, he'd find her. Tomorrow, he'd tell her everything. Tomorrow, he'd start making things right. Emily's hands hadn't stopped shaking since she'd gotten off her shift 3 hours ago. She sat in her tiny studio apartment in Queens, still in her uniform, staring at the photograph that had started everything. The garden, the fountain, the little girl who was supposedly her, and the man in seat 12A who claimed to be her father. She'd done what any rational person would do. Googled him. Charles Miller wasn't hard to find. CEO of Miller Textiles. Net worth estimated at $500 million. Photos of him at charity galas, business conferences, ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Always in expensive suits. Always alone. There were older articles, too. From 1998, local businessman's wife and infant daughter missing. Police treating disappearance as voluntary. Miller family tragedy remains unsolved. The dates matched. The details matched. The wife's name was Susan S. Emily's hand went to the pendant at her throat. The one her mother, the woman she'd called Mother, had given her on her 18th birthday. "This was yours when you were born," she'd said. "I wanted you to have it back." Her mother, Susan Harding, quiet, kind, always working 2 jobs to make ends meet, always making sure Emily had what she needed even when they couldn't afford it. She'd died of cancer 2 years ago, and Emily still couldn't walk past a flower shop without crying. But had Susan Harding been her real name, or had her mother been someone else entirely? The questions were eating her alive. Her phone buzzed. A text from her roommate Jen, who was covering a double shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. "You okay? You seemed weird when you got home." Emily typed back. "Fine. Just tired." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Liar. But I'll let it slide. Home around midnight. Want me to bring pizza? Sure. Emily set the phone down and looked at the photograph again. She'd studied it 1,000 times since she was a kid. Tried to imagine the life she'd had before the orphanage. Before Susan Harding adopted her and gave her a home. The records from St. Catherine's were almost non-existent. Just an intake form that said she'd been surrendered voluntarily. No father listed, mother unnamed. The caseworker had noted unusual circumstances, but never elaborated. Emily had always assumed it meant her birth mother was young, scared, unable to care for a baby. She'd made peace with it. Susan had been a wonderful mother, loving and present. Despite working constantly, Emily never felt unloved. But now this man, this stranger with kind eyes and trembling hands, was telling her everything she thought she knew was wrong. She pulled out her laptop, created a new browser tab, hesitated. Then she typed, "Plaza Hotel New York Room, 1512. Nothing came up. Obviously, hotel guest information wasn't public, but the fact that he'd given her his exact room number suggested he was telling the truth about staying there. She could call, verify he was a guest. Emily stared at her phone. What would she even say? "Hi, I'm the daughter you lost 27 years ago. Maybe? I'm not sure. This is super weird." But if she didn't call, she'd never know. Would spend the rest of her life wondering if the sad man in 12A really was her father. If Susan had been protecting her from something, if everything about her life was built on secrets, before she could talk herself out of it, Emily dialed the Plaza's main number. Plaza Hotel, how may I direct your call? Room 1512, please. One moment. The phone rang. Once, twice, on the third ring. He answered. Hello. Emily's throat closed. That voice, deep, careful, hopeful. Mr. Miller. Emily. Not a question. He knew her voice. Thank you for calling. I'm not sure why I am. Because you want answers, so do I. She stood, walked to the window. Queens stretched out below her, a maze of buildings and lives intersecting and diverging. This is crazy. You know that, right? Completely crazy. You could be some kind of con artist or delusional. I could be, Charles agreed. But I'm not. How do I know that? You don't. Not yet. But I can show you proof. Documents, photographs, hospital records. I can show you everything I've found. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. What if I don't want to know? Then I'll respect that. I won't contact you again. You can go back to your life and forget we ever met. He paused. But I don't think you want that. He was right. God help her. He was right. Where did she go? Emily asked. My birth mother. If your wife took me and disappeared, where did she go? Charles was quiet for a long moment. I think she became Susan Harding. The world tilted. What? Your adoptive mother? The woman who raised you? I think that was my wife, Emily. I think Susan took you and built a new life to protect you. Protect me from what? That's complicated. Can we meet, please? I'll explain everything. Emily's mind was racing. Her mother, Susan, had never talked about her past, always changed the subject when Emily asked about grandparents or where she'd grown up. She'd said her family was estranged, that it was too painful to discuss. What if that had all been lies? Not malicious lies, but protective ones. I need time to think, Emily said. Of course, take all the time you need, but could you send me something? Proof that you are who you say you are? What would you like to see? A picture? Of your wife, the one from before. I'll send it right now. What's your number? Emily gave it to him, then waited. 30 seconds later, her phone buzzed with an incoming message. The photograph that appeared on her screen made her knees weak. The woman in the image was young, mid-20s, standing in front of that same fountain from Emily's childhood photo. She wore a sundress and smiled at the camera with pure joy, and she looked exactly like Emily. Same eyes, same nose, same smile, like looking in a mirror that showed the past instead of the present. Oh my God, Emily whispered. That's Susan, Charles said softly. Taken about a year before you were born. Emily sat down hard on her bed. I look just like her. You do. You have her smile, her kindness. The way you move reminds me of her. Tears blurred Emily's vision. Why didn't she tell me if she was my real mother? Why did she let me think I was adopted? I'm still figuring that out, but Emily, I think she was protecting you from someone. Someone dangerous. Who? My sister, your aunt, Margaret Miller. The name meant nothing to Emily. Why would she need to protect me from your sister? Because Margaret wanted me focused on business, not family, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen, including making your mother and me believe things that weren't true. Emily's head was spinning. This was too much, too fast. I need to process this. I understand. But I want to meet you, tomorrow, somewhere public. Name the place. Emily thought fast. Central Park, the Bethesda Fountain, 2 p.m. I'll be there. And Mr. Miller, bring everything, all the proof you have, because if you're lying to me, if this is some kind of sick game, it's not. I promise you, Emily. I just want to know my daughter. The word hung between them. Daughter. Tomorrow, Emily said, and ended the call before she started crying. She sat in her apartment as evening turned to night, holding her phone and the photograph of the woman who might have been her mother, staring at a face that looked like her own, and wondering how everything she thought she knew could be wrong. Outside her window, the city hummed with life, millions of people living their normal lives while hers fractured into before and after, before that flight, before the photograph fell, before Charles Miller looked at her and saw his lost daughter. When Jen came home at midnight with pizza, she found Emily still sitting in the dark, surrounded by old photos and questions that had no easy answers. "Okay," Jen said, setting down the pizza box. "Spill. What happened?" And for the first time since her mother died, Emily told someone the truth. "I think," she said slowly, "I just found my father." Margaret Miller's office occupied the entire top floor of the Miller Textiles headquarters in Los Angeles. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a constant reminder of everything she'd built, everything she controlled. She stood at those windows now, phone pressed to her ear, listening to her lawyer explain why she couldn't do anything about Charles's investigation. "The statute of limitations has long passed," the lawyer said. "Even if he has evidence of wrongdoing, we're talking about events from 1998. Criminal charges are off the table. What about civil suits? Possible, but unlikely to succeed. And frankly, Miss Miller, if your brother goes public with these allegations, a lawsuit would only draw more attention." Margaret ended the call and threw her phone on the desk hard enough to crack the screen. 27 years. She'd kept this buried for 27 years. And now Charles was going to destroy everything because of some chance encounter on an airplane. Her assistant knocked timidly. "Ms. Miller, the quarterly review meeting starts in 10 minutes. Cancel it." "But the board—" "I said cancel it," Margaret snapped. The assistant fled. Margaret poured herself a scotch from the crystal decanter on her sidebar. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That's what separated her from Charles. He felt things too deeply. Let emotions cloud his judgment. She saw the world clearly, understood that success required sacrifice. She'd made those sacrifices. Why couldn't he see that? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk, in person. Today, Charles." He'd blocked her number, but apparently thought she wouldn't recognize his tactics. Margaret typed back, "I'm in Leh. You're in Nye. Not possible. Then get on a plane. Or I start making calls to reporters." She stared at the message. He was bluffing. Had to be. Charles hated publicity, avoided scandal like the plague. Going public would destroy the company's reputation, tank their stock price, ruin everything they'd spent 3 decades building. But then again, she'd never seen him like this. That phone call last night, the rage in his voice when he'd called her a monster. That wasn't the Charles she knew. That was someone pushed beyond his limits. Someone with nothing left to lose. Margaret booked a red-eye to New York. She arrived at his hotel the next morning, still wearing yesterday's clothes, fueled by coffee and fury. The plaza's lobby was full of tourists and business people starting their days. Margaret cut through them like a shark through water. She didn't bother calling from the lobby, just took the elevator to the 15th floor and knocked on 1512. Charles opened the door. He looked terrible. Unshaven, exhausted, still in the same shirt from their phone call. His eyes were red-rimmed but hard. "You came," he said. "You didn't give me much choice." Margaret pushed past him into the room. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Getting answers. By hiring some 2-bit private investigator to dig up ancient history. By harassing that girl on her flights." "I'm not harassing her. I'm trying to know my daughter." "She's not your daughter," Margaret said sharply. "Not legally. Not in any way that matters. She has Susan's DNA, my DNA. She was born in my house, in my marriage. What else would she be? A stranger who happens to share your genetics. You don't know her, Charles. You didn't raise her. You can't just waltz back into her life after 27 years and play daddy." Charles stepped closer. "You're right. I didn't raise her. Because you stole her from me. I saved you from making the biggest mistake of your life. By destroying my family. By protecting your future." Margaret's control cracked. "Do you have any idea where you'd be right now if I hadn't intervened? Still in that Brooklyn brownstone, working some middle management job, coming home every night to a crying baby and a wife who needed constant attention. You'd have been miserable. I was happy. You were settling, and deep down, you knew it. That's why it was so easy for you to believe Susan left, because part of you wondered if you'd made a mistake too." The words hit their mark. Charles's face went white. "That's not true, isn't it? You threw yourself into work after she disappeared. Barely looked back. Built this empire without a single regret. Until some photograph fell out of a flight attendant's pocket. Don't pretend you were pining away all these years, Charles. You got exactly what you wanted. What I wanted was my family. Then why didn't you look harder? Margaret challenged. You hired investigators for 2 years and gave up. If you'd really loved Susan, really wanted Emily back, you'd have never stopped searching. Charles grabbed her arm. Because you made me believe they didn't want to be found. You planted that note. You created a story I could accept. You manipulated me. Margaret jerked free. I gave you permission to move on. You're welcome. You're insane. I'm practical. There's a difference. She straightened her jacket. And speaking of practical, let's talk about what happens next. You go public with this. The company suffers. Stock price drops. Investors panic. We lose contracts, all because you can't let go of the past. I don't care about the company. Yes, you do. It's all you've had for 27 years. Not anymore. Margaret studied him carefully. He meant it. She could see it in his eyes. That dangerous determination of someone who'd already made peace with burning everything down. What do you want? She asked finally. I want you gone. Out of the company. Out of my life. I'm a majority shareholder. You can't force me out. Watch me. I've already spoken to the board members I trust. They're willing to vote for your removal once they hear what you did. They won't believe you without proof. I have proof. Nurse's confession. Bank records. Witness statements. Everything Collins found. Margaret's jaw tightened. That won't hold up in court. Don't need it to. Just need enough to convince the board you're a liability. And you are, Margaret. The moment this story breaks, you become toxic. No one will want to work with you. This will destroy you too. Maybe. But I'll still have Emily. What will you have? The question hung between them. Margaret looked at her brother. Really looked at him. And saw a stranger. The Charles she knew would never risk everything for something as intangible as family. Would never choose emotion over logic. But this wasn't the brother she'd manipulated for 3 decades. This was someone new. Someone she couldn't control. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. The only mistake I made was trusting you. Charles, get out. We can fix this. Find a compromise. Get out, Charles shouted. Get out before I call security and have you thrown out. Margaret held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. I did what I thought was right. What was best for both of us. No, you did what was best for you. There's a difference. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. What was there to say? That she'd acted out of love. They both knew that was a lie. That she'd had no choice. There were always choices. I'm sorry, she said finally. For what it's worth. It's worth nothing. She left without another word. In the elevator, descending back to the lobby, Margaret pulled out her phone. Her lawyer had left 3 voicemails. The board secretary had sent an urgent email requesting a meeting. They knew somehow word was already spreading. Margaret's empire, the one she'd sacrificed everything to build, was beginning to crumble, and for the first time in her life, she didn't know how to stop it. After Margaret left, Charles stood at the window, watching the city wake up. His phone showed 1:47 p.m. In 13 minutes, he was supposed to meet Emily at Bethesda Fountain. He grabbed the folder Collins had prepared, all the documents, all the proof, and headed for the door. Time to tell his daughter the truth. Time to start rebuilding what Margaret had destroyed. Outside, the city hummed with possibility, and somewhere in Central Park, Emily was waiting. Emily arrived at Bethesda Fountain 15 minutes early, nervous energy making it impossible to sit still. She'd changed clothes 3 times before settling on jeans and a sweater, casual enough not to seem like she was trying too hard, nice enough to feel put together. Jen had offered to come along for moral support. Emily had almost said yes, then decided this was something she needed to do alone. The fountain was crowded with tourists taking photos, street performers entertaining small crowds, couples holding hands, normal people living normal lives. Emily envied them. She sat on a bench with a clear view of the approaching paths, hands clutched around a coffee she couldn't drink. Her stomach was doing gymnastics. What if he didn't show? What if this whole thing was some elaborate hoax? What if it wasn't? At exactly 2 o'clock, she saw him, Charles Miller, wearing dark slacks and a button-down shirt, carrying a leather messenger bag. He looked different outside the confines of the airplane, less intimidating, more human and nervous as she felt. Their eyes met across the fountain. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Emily stood, and Charles walked toward her. "Hi," he said when he reached her. Simple, inadequate for the moment, but what else was there to say? "Hi." They stood there awkwardly until Charles gestured to the bench. "May I?" Emily nodded, and they sat with careful distance between them. Charles set the messenger bag on his lap. "Thank you for meeting me. I know this must be completely insane," Emily offered. A small smile touched his lips. "I was going to say overwhelming, but insane works too. I didn't sleep at all last night." "Neither did I." Emily looked at him. Really looked. He had kind eyes. Tired, yes, and sad in a way that seemed permanent, but kind. And there was something familiar in the shape of his face, the way he held himself. "You brought the proof?" she asked. Charles opened the bag. "Everything I have. But before I show you, I need to tell you something. This isn't going to be easy to hear. None of this has been easy." "Fair point." He pulled out a folder. "The woman who raised you, Susan Harding. Did she ever talk about her past, her family?" Emily shook her head. "She always said it was too painful, that she'd had a falling out with her relatives and preferred not to discuss it. Did you believe her?" "I was a kid. Why wouldn't I?" Emily paused. But looking back, yeah, it was weird how completely she'd cut ties. No photos, no stories, no old friends. Like her life started the day she adopted me. Charles handed her a photograph. "This is my wife, Susan, taken in 1997. Emily took it with trembling hands. The woman in the photo stood in a garden, that garden from her childhood picture, smiling at the camera. Dark hair, warm eyes, a sundress with small flowers. Emily had seen this face before, in mirrors, in old photographs her mother had kept hidden in a box. This is my mom," she whispered. "Yes, but that means..." Emily's mind raced through the implications. "She didn't adopt me. She was my real mother. Biologically, yes, and in every way that matters." Charles pulled out more documents. "But legally, the adoption was real. Susan gave you up, then adopted you back under a different name. Why would she do that? Because someone convinced her she had no other choice." Charles spent the next 20 minutes explaining everything. Margaret's ambition, the nurse's confession, the falsified records, the witness who'd seen Margaret arguing with Susan the day before she disappeared. Emily listened, her coffee growing cold in her hands, as her entire life was rewritten. "So my aunt, this Margaret woman, she threatened my mother." "Yes, and my mother thought you'd signed away your rights to me. That's what Margaret told her. Made her believe I didn't want either of you anymore." Emily felt tears building. "She died thinking you abandoned us." Charles's voice broke. "I know. She used to cry sometimes, late at night, when she thought I was asleep. I'd hear her in the kitchen, just sobbing quietly. I always wondered what made her so sad. I'm sorry, God, Emily. I'm so sorry if I'd known, if I'd kept looking. You didn't know." Emily wiped her eyes. "You couldn't have known." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the fountain spray water into the air, watching strangers live their uncomplicated lives. "Tell me about her," Emily said finally. "The real her before all this happened." Charles smiled, a genuine one this time. "She was incredible, smart, funny, terrible at cooking, but she tried anyway. She loved old movies, the black and white ones, Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers. She'd make me watch them with her on weekends." Emily's breath caught. "I love old movies, Mom. Susan. We used to watch them together all the time. She sang to you when you were a baby. Off-key. But she didn't care. Said you didn't know the difference anyway. She sang to me when I was older too, lullabies. Even when I was too old for them." Emily's tears fell freely now. "I thought she was just being a mom. I didn't know she'd been doing it since I was born." Charles pulled out another photo. This one showed Susan holding a newborn, her face radiant with exhausted joy. "That's you," he said. 6 hours old." Emily stared at the image. Her mother, young, happy, surrounded by the trappings of a hospital room, holding a tiny bundle. She loved me, Emily said, even when she thought she had to give me up. She loved me enough to find a way to keep me. She did, and she protected you for 27 years. From Margaret. Yes. Emily looked up at him. And you're my father, actually. Biologically my father. Yes. This is real. This is actually happening. It is. Emily set down her coffee and turned to face him fully. I grew up without a dad. Kids at school would do father-daughter dances, bring their dads to career day. Mom tried to make up for it, but it wasn't the same. I used to fantasize about my birth father showing up one day. Some dramatic reunion like in the movies. Charles listened, his expression pained. But I never actually thought it would happen, Emily continued. Definitely never thought it would happen like this. I know this is a lot, and I don't expect. I mean, you don't have to call me dad or anything. I'm not trying to force a relationship. I just wanted you to know the truth. What do you want? Emily asked. From me. From this. Charles was quiet for a long moment. I want to know you. Want to hear about your life, your dreams. Want to tell you about your mother, the real Susan, not just the version